Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yuracek.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Srinjoy Mitra. Now, Dr. Mitra is very special in terms of the podcast because this is actually the first time that we've done a video and audio interview. So the reason we were able to do this was because we actually met up in Glasgow, Scotland for the Human Brain Project conference. And we were able to talk a little bit about his work with multi-electrode probes and being able to basically read up to 1,000 neurons on 1,000 areas of signal from one probe, one electrode. Since then, he has moved on a little bit to other projects, but it was nonetheless very, very informative. Tell us your name and your affiliation, where you're from, what was your history as well.
Okay, so I'm Srinjoy Mitra. I'm a lecturer at University of Glasgow now. I joined Glasgow early 2016, and prior to that I was in IMEC, Belgium. I spent there as a researcher and a senior researcher later. I spent around 6 years in IMEC. I was as a postdoc, I was in Johns Hopkins University prior to that, in electrical engineering as well. I did my PhD from ETH Zurich. And before that, I was also in industry for nearly 2 years in India and in Japan. Yeah, that's more or less. Other than I have undergrad in physics and masters in electronics. That's more or less my academic.
Yeah. Lots of stuff all over the world.
Also, right? Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And so I think the most interesting, the most relevant stuff for the Neural Implant Podcast and this upcoming YouTube channel that we're making is probably your work at IMEC, right? And these multi-electrode arrays, something like this. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? I mean, you were talking, you wrote an email before, like, I don't know how much I can, due to non-disclosure agreements and everything like this. But a general overview, like what is it and how does it work?
Well, it's about, so as I've seen in the talk today and also in general, so people used to use wire electrodes for brain recording, for neural recording for long. Then they started using more electrodes, which is just electrodes, 3 or 4 wires plunged together in the brain. So that was more or less a technology for decades. And then came silicon neural probes, where you can have multi-electrodes on the same shank, so you can record from different depths. Otherwise, for all the wire electrodes, everything that you can collect is at the tip of the electrode. Whatever signals you got, that's it. Basically, you got 4 signals. And here you have more electrodes all throughout the shank, so you could get multiple recordings at different depths. So that was an interesting thing to have. And a lot of companies started building them, even custom probes. You could just order a probe of whatever shape and size you want at the length. And there's also, I'm still talking of a single probe going into the brain, but there are UTA probes, which are multi-probes going into the brain, which is altogether a different idea. But single probes going into the brain with multiple electrodes on them is a popular technology for neuroscientists, particularly neurophysiologists, to work with animal experiments. Then a PhD student in IMEC, along with, of course, there were other people around her. They started building this different kind of silicon CMOS probe, so which is not only silicon probe where you can use the lithographic technique of silicon, but actually have circuits in them, transistors and circuits in them. So and I became part of that project. So it was probe with more functionality, so to say. So you don't not only have electrodes all throughout the shank, you can also select which electrode to use. It was, IMEC already had a history of that. They started calling it EDC probe, electronic depth control probe. That's basically, you can select which depth you are recording from. It's the same idea. You have some little bit of electronics on the shank to select which electrode you want to. So from there, the PhD project, which was done by Carolina Mora Lopez, she started putting more electronics on the shank as amplifiers and all, so that you not only select but also restore the signal quality that might get degraded if you have so many electrodes on the single shank. Because if you have so many electrodes, of course, you have to draw thin wires, and thin wires are more resistive, and also they couple to more environmental artifact and crosstalk between the wires. So all these things apparently could be solved if we put some electronics on the shank. So that's how that started, and then we got more adventurous to build even a denser shank with more and more electrodes. And a PhD student who worked with me for a long time on this in IMEC, we started this in a project called NeuroSeeker, which is a EU-funded project, which was very, very, I'd say, bold in a way that they wanted to have few thousand electrodes, I would say maybe 20,000 or so electrodes. But we didn't reach there. What we did was 1,500 or close to 1,500 electrodes.
Oh, one probe?
One probe. 1,500 electrodes, that's actually 1,400 something. But you can record from all of them. And that is really a big breakthrough in neurophysiology. People who have been using them, I don't think they want to go back to anything else. I've been talking to them for future work, what we can do together, and none of them want to lose that functionality of recording from the entire probe with that much density. They might want to record not from all part of it, but they don't want to give it away as a design. So they'll always say, well, give me all the probe, I will decide later. So you cannot design, okay, we can only record from here and there. So I think this is becoming more and more common to have CMOS probes, particularly CMOS probe and CMOS probes with this kind of functionality. And all these things really benefited from IMEC's post-processing technology, which I didn't mention here at all, which is how to build or how to make these electrodes, because the electrodes became smaller as you have so many of them, how to lower the impedance of the electrodes themselves. And without that, the electronics wouldn't be very useful. So you have to lower the impedance of the electrode. Yeah, so these are various things going on this field. I think the future would be multi-shank probe, which people are already using multi-shank probe, or more fancy multi-shank probes, multi-shanks with thousands of electrodes.
Wow.
People want to have as many electrodes.
Yeah. So you can have like 10 or 100 or something. You can have like a BlackRock array with 100 probes, and then each one of those has 1,000, right?
Could be a Utah or a BlackRock probe, yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
Just recently a paper came out which my student directed me to. It's about how much tissue you are displacing by putting all those electrodes. So actually, that's another consideration. You cannot just pincushion the entire brain. But still, I think neuroscientists are quite bold in how much they can go ahead with this kind. So they want technology for sure, and the technology, they're becoming more acceptable to new. They're accepting new technology. There was kind of reluctance when we started because they want to do science, of course. They don't want to spend half a year trying a technology which might not finally work. If we couldn't give them equal data quality, even if we had more electrode, it wouldn't help because they need data quality for spike sorting, for finding the right LFPs and all. So and now there is a level of maturity that people know that CMOS probes are possible.
Yeah, and you're saying like all the data processing happens on the chip, pretty much on the probe, like as close as possible to the neurons, right?
Yes. So the main data processing is just impedance transformations. You don't want the long narrow wire from the electrode to the back, to the base, to have high impedance. So you were basically putting a GM stage or transconductance stage or amplifier sometimes to have a low output impedance rather than the electrode, which has sometimes hundreds of kilo ohms or mega ohms of impedance. The amplifier might have tens, some kilo ohm, way less, 100 times less output impedance. So that's the basic requirement of the signal processing that you need to do there. But if you want to record from the whole shank, like the final probe or the final design that I mentioned, 1400 electrode, you cannot rely on that. You have to do some multiplexing. You have to multiplex from multiple electrode together on a single wire because you don't have space to draw all these wires. Because you also have to provide power and you have to provide some data because you're selecting which probe to record when. Power and data has to go in, and you need pretty thick wires to deliver those as well. There's a huge power draw from one corner of the shank to the tip of the shank, so that's a few hundreds of millivolts, or close to 150 to 100 millivolt. So that's very unlikely for a silicon chip. In silicon chip, you design in a way that power is same all throughout. You don't have power which is very different from one corner to another. This is very unlikely. But here there is no other way because you have everything is coming from one corner and you have a very unusually looking silicon chip going.
And you were talking about power dissipation too. I mean, with all these wires and all this information.
That's another thing.
How does that work?
Power dissipation. Well, there is a very rough ballpark number of 1 degree centigrade. So that's something we have been thinking about, whether this is truly a number to be seriously consider about or not. So someone came up with this number that the brain shouldn't be heated up more than 1 degree centigrade anyway. So in this design, at least we did a lot of simulations to see how much power we can dissipate at different parts of the probe so that the area around the probe doesn't heat up more than 1 degree centigrade. Because even if a localized area dissipates some power, there is a power flow or energy flow from another part of the chip because there is nowhere to go. I mean, it's not, you don't have a heat sink close by. So power flows in all direction or energy flows in all direction. So it was something that my IMEX colleagues did about what are the good places to have dissipate more power and where they should restrict the power and so on. But I would say all of these are dependent on this basic premise that you have 1 degree centigrade at your disposal. So if it was 2 degrees centigrade, maybe you could do many more things. And no one really knows whether it's 2 degrees centigrade or even 5 degrees centigrade. Because I know neuroscientists, when they do optogenetics, they have LEDs inside the brain. And LEDs dissipate a lot of power and they don't bother. But we try to keep this limit because at least IMEX intention is to make this more easily available to a bigger group of a community of neuroscientists. So we wanted to make something which has these boundary conditions. Because if you didn't start with the boundary conditions, if you didn't have these boundary conditions, then it could just blow up at some point.
Interesting. And okay, so where do you see the future going? I mean, would you see maybe like a PDOT surface or maybe hydrogel covers or something like this? Do you think this would improve the results, or what do you kind of see as the next steps?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is more how to make the electrodes better, the surface of the electrode better. So that's the post-processing you need to do. You get the CMOS chip from the foundry and then you post-process to put the electrode, deposit the electrode. So there are various ways of depositing electrodes, various electrodes that have lower impedance than the other one. But I think there was one of the restriction is which one can you scale up? Because what you can do in a lab and what you can do in a commercial foundry or semi-commercial foundry might be very different. In the lab, you handle one chip at a time. Even if you're half of the electrodes don't work, you don't care. And the other half, it's good to publish a paper sometimes. I think that's why these things are not as common, like very PDOT and other kind of electrodes maybe. They might become more common later. So the electrode that we have here is titanium nitride, which is a good material to be used in foundry as semi-commercial fashion. IMEC did quite a lot of work on making it, bringing it up to a maturity so that we can use it for this kind of probes. You
weren't really so interested in with the surface or something like that. You were more on the CMOS side of things.
Indeed, yeah. The surface. I'm not a fab guy, so in fab they play with a lot of surface technology, and Also, you have to thin, which I didn't mention at all, you have to thin the whole probe. You have to thin it down to as thin as possible. And silicon can be theoretically thinned down to, I don't know, maybe tens of microns, even less than 10 micron. But we don't do that. In some of these probes, I think we stopped at 30 or 40 micron because the silicon becomes very flexible, and it bends and it gets stressed, and so the electronics starts to behave weirdly because you have so much of so many transistors and such a big chunk of silicon which can also bend and so on. So it becomes a little bit more tricky. So yeah, those are people in the fab people in the post-processing side who think about what is a good electrode material, what is the best way of thinning the chip, because thinning also requires very different methodology. One can produce more stress, another might not, and so these are things that I normally didn't bother until now, but I might. Depends on where my interests go. Until now, I was mostly interested on the electronics of this whole thing.
So I guess what could be improved on that side of things?
One thing that can definitely change is the size of this. So you have a very narrow, thin shank, and you have a big base, and that is something people are not happy with. So you can definitely change that. That requires some, and there's always a history to electronics design. Once you produce something in good quality, you don't want to throw away your older design. You build on top of that normally, because it takes at least a year's effort to build a whole chip like that. So we have to just go back to our drawing boards and see what you can actually throw away and start from scratch, so that we can make smaller base that can be handled. Right? Yeah, so you have a very thin and narrow shank, and there's a pretty big base, and that helps neuroscientists to hold it, neurophysiologists to hold it, but it's also problematic if you have many probes, because I know people who are using multiple probes of even our kind on the brain of animals. So it's very cumbersome to have so many probes with such a big base. So the base is at least, I would say, another around 9 to 10 in one direction and 7 to 8 millimeter in another direction. So it's much bigger than the shank, and in the mice brain is almost 4 or 5. I don't know, maybe 10 millimeter in one direction, more than that.
So it's like the whole width of the skull, something like this.
Yeah,
right?
It takes a big space.
Wow. Okay. So you would shrink down the electronics, or what are you thinking? That
electronics could be shrunk down. Yes, indeed. Yeah, but it depends. This is one part of my work. I mean, I'm not actively working on new neural implants right now, because the project that I was working on is kind of finished just a few months back, so it's still good. So that's I'll probably definitely think about that, and also make more multi-shank probes and distributed probes that can, because we are still doing experiments on a single cortical column, say. And what about the rest? I mean, if you can, as you said, a black rock array or things like that, if you can make more electronics in that, which is easy to handle, and then more.
Yeah, like what about, I mean, one electronics chip and then like multiple probes coming out of that, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And the very important thing that I definitely work on is data compression. And data compression is with this amount of data, you cannot send it in. Even if it is a wireless, forget about it, there's no way. But even for wired, you could send it if you have a huge battery pack, but that data will go out, but the mice will, the brain will get fried up because it's so much of power dissipation.
You're talking a half gigabit per second or something like that?
Yeah, it's almost like that. Yeah,
that's
half
crazy.
Gigabit per second, and the data is, and even for wired communication, we have seen it's a huge amount of power dissipation. Actually, the biggest chunk of power dissipation in the whole chip is data transmission, because there is a long cable that goes to somewhere in a desk where a few meters of cable, because the mice is probably in the maze or in some experimental setup, and you have a commutator with the cable that goes through there. And particularly if you want to have a freely moving mouse, even more difficult. So to drive this long cable, you dissipate a lot of power. So, and most of the information is useless. After you do that, you see that there are no spikes in many cases, in most cases. So if you can do a nice data compression on chip, I mean, it's not new. People have been doing it for decades. But another problem is whether neuroscientists accept that. It's also the same problem, whether they accept. Because they don't want to lose any data. Whenever you say you will compress the data, they'll say if it's lossless compression, you cannot do much lossless compression, and then it won't be very good compression at all. So I think the compressed sensing method I mentioned, we found a good solution, kind of a middle ground to many things. But I have to work more on that and see how people accept that, whether it's a useful technology to take.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, that's the advantage of the CMOS, right? Is it's inbuilt compression, like as close as possible to the probe, as close as possible to the data, and then that way you don't have so much power dissipation when it goes further. And so, how much were you able to compress it, and how much were you able to compress the data?
The papers we published, we took data from, I mean, it depends on the kind of data always. We took available data like publicly available data, and also some data from one of our probes. So I would say they are pretty representative data, because you also need a high density neural recording for the compression technique to show that it will work. Because if you have if you cannot take a recording from any random data set and compress it, it won't make sense. So we tried to do this, and we could go at least 10 times. I think 10 times is definitely possible. Again, if it's 10 times over a long duration of time, I don't know, because it depends. The data compression we did needs kind of a template. I mean, it has a learning phase, and then it uses the learning. So if a small time when it learns a couple of what you call dictionary of spikes, and so after that it uses that to compress. What happens is the spike shape keeps changing if you do a chronic recording. If you record for a day or two, and when the probe moves, the glial cells around the probe, so the spike shape, which is normally very monotonic and repetitive, will change after a while. But this, the compressed sensing we used also has a method to understand whether your recovery quality is falling down over time. So then it will trigger a relearning phase, so that you don't need to wait. And so the human in the loop doesn't need to wait and see, well, my compression has, or at least what I'm decompressing is meaningless, because it's the spike shape has already changed.
So this is in the chip that is calculating and adapting?
Yeah, it has. Well, that part is outside. Compressed sensing that's quite good, because what you need to put at the source is much less, but what you need outside is a lot. But it's fine. That's okay. So this recovery quality monitoring is outside. So it monitors the recovery quality and sends a relearning trigger. So you have to stop recording and learn for a little while. But all these things are difficult for neuroscientists to accept immediately, because what they want is, well, give me data and I will look at it later, which is understandable because they are used to work with that. But that might not be possible for too long.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's initiatives, right, for 100,000 or 1 million probes. Like, that's so much data, you know, that's so much heat, probably. It'd be like having a campfire.
That's true. And also, how do you store the data? And that's another thing. And it's gigabits, terabytes of external memory and all. Yeah, I mean, it's not that people are not working on that. There, I would say, more neuroscientists have spent a lot of time building fancy softwares to do that. And but I would say compression is something we have to take more seriously now.
Okay, so if we wanted to do the million electrodes, then what would we have to do in order to achieve that?
A million electrode. Wow. First of all, I mean, you cannot do a million electrode on a single shank. You have to maybe distribute all over the brain. But the question is, I mean, technology can probably give you things, but whether it's a meaningful million electrode is a completely different question. I wouldn't try to answer that question before a neurophysiologist can convince me and a community that that particular million electrode would be useful. If it's a million electrode on a single shank, it's definitely not useful. Mm-hmm. If it's a million electrode distributed in a strategically located area, it could be useful, but who knows? Of course, someone would like to know about every neuron in the brain. Mm-hmm. That's not possible, so you only select where you want to look at. It would probably be something of a surface covered system. So you do ECOG and neural recording together. It's probably possible. So you might do ECOG on the surface, and you might at the same time have some electrodes going deep. So yeah, with all these things, might be able to build up more. I think the number is not important. The more important thing is what are the places to record.
Well, I'm talking, I guess, to follow your expertise more in the electronics and everything like this, and from the electronics, from the CMOS side, what would need to be, in place in order to reach this goal of 1 million. I mean, it is a lofty goal. Mm-hmm. It's as 100,000 or 100 times more than or 1,000 times more than what you are doing right now, but. That can be close. That can only be 10 years away or something like this. So what would be required?
On the electronic side, it depends on what... I would try to answer it at least in a different way. First of all, it's more important to implant them in, and if you want to have 1 million electrodes in the brain, probably you don't want to let them move around easily. So, or I would say not lose data from half of them. You want to collect data from most of them, and that's why some people I know work on how to have a huge number of electrodes in the brain, but more of a kind of not strictly defined places, but they can slightly move around a little bit with the movement of the brain, which helps to make these electrodes so very high density electrodes, because there is a huge difference in the tensile strength or the elasticity of the brain and the foreign body that you're putting in. So if you can kind of match them in some way, so you have to either make them smaller or make them with a different material that floats around in the brain. But that's on the technology side. On the electronic side, I would say we have to use technology. Here I mean by technology is silicon technology at a lower node. Now we are using 130 nanometer or sometimes 180 nanometer technology nodes. We have to go even further down. But no one has done them for long in the brain, particularly because they're quite... These low technology nodes are very, very optimized for digital electronics, and doing analog design in these low technology nodes is a nuisance, because it has higher noise, it has all sorts of higher additional problems that you don't want to bother with. Analog designs normally don't need this technology. If your design have to be so small, then there is nothing else you can do. If you only have to have very tiny amount of space. So that's one thing. And as I said, data compression, what else? Maybe some sort of multiplexing that we did before has to be done in a much larger scale. There is no way you can record from all these electrodes, process them and digitize them in a single channel, or even bring them out of the brain. So you have to somehow multiplex them and put them in a fewer number of watts, if at all there are watts. So I'm just blind guessing.
Of course. Yeah.
Its question is whether it will be at all useful. But yeah, why not? Million electrodes could be a nice.
I mean, in the future.
Million electrodes.
So, what do you see kind of like a wrong path, or what is kind of a mistake that you see some of your colleagues doing, or that you're kind of like frustrated about and you wish you think is the wrong direction?
That's hard to say, because every one of us, people we know in our field, of course, everyone publishes their good results. No one published what didn't work. So I wouldn't know what didn't work for other people. And they all have I have to say, first of all, there are no CMOS probe of this kind. So it's not that we were competing with other people who were doing exactly or close to this. So we are pretty, at least until now, quite unique in that sense. Maybe very soon someone else will be doing that. But I think there are quite a few groups doing silicon probes or EDC kind of probes, electronic depth control probes, and they're doing good job. So I cannot say any of them has taken a wrong path or anything. I mean, it's not something that I would like to comment.
Okay. Yeah, of course, that could get you in trouble, I guess. But,
Well, not something. I mean, it's also, I mean, they might have tried going through a wrong path and didn't work and finally found something that worked. And that's the only thing I know. And
that is true, though. Like, if you somehow, like that. I mean, I think journals would be like full of, negative results or like stuff that didn't work, because that's actually the majority of what we do actually, right? Yeah. But, it would be cool to know, rather than just your closest circle of what didn't work, and I think that can be just as useful as what did work. It could really save a lot of time. Cool. So if people want to find you or contact you or learn more about you, how do they do that?
Well, I am in University of Glasgow now, but actually from next month I'll be moving to University of Edinburgh. And for academics, it's easy. Just type their name in Google and it will come up. We are supposed to maintain a web page, and it's not difficult to find us at all. And particularly if you don't have a very common name.
Yeah, that's true. I have the same.
Or just mail me in my university email address. That's fine. And I'm always. I read my emails.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, hopefully you guys have enjoyed that, and either if you're watching it on YouTube or if you are listening to the podcast, Neural Implant Podcast, then please let me know what you thought about it, where I can improve, what you thought of Dr. Mitra's work, and if you thought this was useful, if you already knew this. So please let me know what you think. So this is kind of an experiment. It's kind of a little bit of a prototype to be able to do these videos. The videos are much more work, I would say. And luckily though, I have accumulated the video equipment because of another project. So I'm like, maybe I can use it here. Anyways, it is much more work. I would say maybe 4 times as much work. And then on top of that, I should be in the areas to be able to do it in person. I think that's much better than over video, like a video Skype. I think that's going to be a very low quality, and there's going to be just lots of problems. Anyways, I don't think that's going to be a good idea. I think it'll have to be in person, face-to-face kind of thing. So please let me know what you think. If this is worth an investment of my time, and if you can have even more, educational output or educational benefit from it, please let me know. As you may have seen in this, I may have put up a little bit of a few slides here and there to help really describe what's been going on. So please let me know and write to me, neuralimplantpodcast@gmail.com, all one word. And until next time.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.